on to Meghan McCain now. So Meghan McCain is, if somehow you don't know, Meghan McCain is the daughter of former U.S. Senator and former 2008 presidential candidate John McCain. She wrote this book called Dirty Sexy Politics, and I wish I was joking about that book title, but I'm not. She actually did write that, and she's a host on The View now for no other reason than for people to laugh at her, and just because she's super privileged and she's a daughter of a former senator. So she has her spot on The View that she probably doesn't deserve in any way, but at the same time, if we're looking at the bright side about it, then we do get to enjoy her fucking up and doing these ridiculous, overly dramatic reactions to basically everything that goes on the left now. So she's been going crazy about Venezuela. She's been going crazy about the Green New Deal. Now she's going crazy about Ilhan Omar and her supposedly anti-Semitic comments. But obviously, I think almost everybody on the progressive side of things agrees that the comments that Ilhan Omar made weren't anti-Semitic. I think that's basically a consensus at this point. There may be a few people here and there that disagree with that, but I think you're being fooled if you do disagree with it, because genuinely nothing she said was anti-Semitic. Even if it had a way of some people being able to say, well, if it's framed that way, then it kind of plays into anti-Semitic tropes. Like, it's like a somewhat fair critique, but at the same time, it's still not what she meant by that. She was just pointing out a fact. So now you can't just go and turn that around and say, well, you know, she was pointing out a fact, but it kind of sounds like something that would be an anti-Semitic trope. So we have to just condemn it, and we have to condemn Ilhan Omar, and we have to put out this gigantic press release from the Democratic establishment and House leadership and say that we condemn all of this anti-Semitic speech by Ilhan Omar. And I think that entire thing is ridiculous. I think people who are getting fooled by establishment figures and media figures that those comments actually were anti-Semitic, I think they got to get their head out of the bubble a little bit and just take a look at what they really are without the framing of those establishment and media figures that are framing it already as anti-Semitic before they even give you the comments, where people, I think, are somewhat being like, oh, well, yeah, it's anti-Semitic, but it's like, but did you really look at it and break it down on why it's anti-Semitic? Or did you just hear that it's anti-Semitic and then you saw the comments and then you just bought into that framework? Because genuinely, she literally told the truth, that there's powerful pro-Israel lobbies that do lobbying for a right-wing Israeli government. There are plenty of foreign governments that have lobbies here. It's not just Israel. It's not just AIPAC. But she pointed out that AIPAC has a lot of sway, and it does. And that's it. It's a pro-Israel lobby. It has nothing to do with just Jews versus people who aren't Jewish. It's nothing anti-Semitic about it. It's just that there is a group lobbying for a foreign government that is paying politicians and swaying their opinions on certain matters for a right-wing government in Israel that is committing atrocities. And there is nothing wrong with pointing that out. And the fact that that got blown out of proportion, that is one of the main news stories that made my blood boil all year. Like, just that one, the way that Chelsea Clinton came at it and the way that Meghan McCain's coming at it in this clip that I'm about to show you, it's just disgusting, and it's so stupid if any one of these people is actually being legitimate about their outrage about this. Like, Chelsea Clinton, I think she's just being disingenuous and just grandstanding on it. But maybe she's just that stupid. You never know. But I mean, a lot of these figures, like Nancy Pelosi and other Democratic figures, they were coming out and just condemning Ilhan Omar and saying that they're disgusting anti-Semitic comments. I think you're out of your fucking mind, because they weren't disgusting and they weren't anti-Semitic, and they were pointing out a problem with the U.S.'s system of politics and how it's negatively affecting foreign policy in the United States, how it's negatively affecting the freedom of speech in the United States, because don't forget, there are a lot of rules or a lot of laws in certain states that ban you being in favor of BDS for you to get a government contract. So don't act like it's not even just foreign, or that it's just foreign policy. It's foreign policy, and it's also domestic policy, because the freedom of speech and the First Amendment rights of certain people has been violated due to the fact that these states have laws on the books that are in favor of Israel, and they don't want you to speak out against Israel, so you basically have to be pro-Israel or non-critical of Israel to be able to even get a government contract, and that is a violation of the First Amendment. So that's how deep it goes, and Ilhan Omar wasn't even, I'm sure she was indirectly referring to the fact that it goes way further than just foreign policy, but just even in the treatment of Palestine alone, that's an open-air prison. And Israel is doing it, and Israel has committed multiple human rights violations. So, are we ever going to do anything about it? Is anybody ever going to bring anything up about it outside of just progressives on independent media sites? And finally, somebody said something about it, and they almost got hung out to dry. And luckily, there were enough progressive members of Congress, enough progressive politicians in general, enough progressive figures in news outlets like Glenn Greenwald from The Intercept, who at least got their voice out there and stood by Ilhan Omar when all this came out. Because if these people didn't stand by Ilhan Omar and there wasn't this groundswell of support saying that, no, Ilhan Omar did not say anything wrong, and she is not being anti-Semitic by saying that, then she would have been completely hung out to dry by now. I mean, the leadership of the Democratic Party were drawing up letters condemning everything immediately. Nancy Pelosi had that letter out there. It was all with House leadership. So it's not technically the leadership of the Democratic Party. I don't want to misquote that. It was Democratic House leadership drew up that letter immediately. It was Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Hakeem Jeffries, and they were immediately condemning it. And you know that this House resolution that was getting voted on today, if people didn't stand up for Ilhan Omar, and people like Bernie Sanders didn't stick their neck out for Ilhan Omar, and people like Rashida Tlaib, then she would have been hung out to dry by now, and it would have been far more, and the consequences for her saying nothing wrong would have been far more serious. So just keep in mind that her criticizing Israel, they were dying to take her down in Congress after she said that. Republicans were dying to take her down. Parts of the Democratic establishment were dying to take her down. And without the groundswell of support from progressives and other people who just were logical about the matter, if they didn't step up and really make their voices heard and say, no, we support Ilhan Omar, and what she said is not anti-Semitic, and people are going way over the line by criticizing her as some anti-Semite now, then she would have been fucked over a lot worse than she actually was. So keep that in mind, and everybody that made their voice heard on this topic and supported Ilhan Omar, and whatever you did in it, whether it was just tweeting your support with the hashtag I stand with Ilhan, or you donated to her website, whatever it may be, that support helped get through this entire controversy, because this controversy was manufactured. Now the Democratic Party's acting like, you'll see all these reports now saying, oh, well, you know what, we needed to clean up this entire mess and this whole controversy, and we just want to get our hands clean of it. And that's the Democratic Party saying that. But it's like, you guys were the ones that took it so seriously in the first place. You could have backed up Ilhan Omar and stood by her like somebody like Bernie Sanders did, or like Rashida Tlaib did. But they didn't, and you had Democratic leadership going and drawing up that whole condemnation letter where they were calling it anti-Semitic immediately. So you have these people calling it anti-Semitic from Democratic leadership, and that's what made it even more of a controversy, because now it's not just Republicans lobbying against it, now it's Democratic leadership lobbying against it, and people in very high up places in Democratic Congress that are against Ilhan Omar in this certain situation. So it really was a moment of courage for Ilhan Omar, and she's been courageous throughout her entire term in office so far, which hasn't been that long, but she's made a lot of an impact so far, and she's really spoke out, and she's really shown the light on some of the corruption that we already knew existed in Washington, D.C., but she just made it so obvious with this particular one in terms of the support of Israel and the support of AIPAC. So let's finally get to Meghan McCain, who has no idea what she's talking about. She rarely ever does. And she is going to go on and blubber about Ilhan Omar's so-called anti-Semitic comments and just make a fool out of herself for the 1,000th time on The View. And I wish some of the people on The View, mainly Joy Behar, because Joy Behar is the most progressive one on there, I wish that Joy Behar had more kind of stood up for Ilhan Omar in this clip, because if anyone was going to, it was going to have to be Joy Behar. But still, either way, everybody knows that Meghan McCain is making a fool out of herself in this clip, unless you're a Republican or you're some kind of like diehard Nancy Pelosi fan, which at this point I just don't get how you could be a diehard Nancy Pelosi fan, but I'm sure there are some out there. So let's get to Meghan McCain being a complete idiot as always.
Just really quickly, since we're talking about I take this very personally. I would go so far as to say I probably verge on being a Zionist as well. But I will say that I don't have family that is Jewish, but Joe Lieberman and Hadassah Lieberman are my family.
Yeah.
And I take the hate crimes rising in this country incredibly seriously, and I think what's happening in Europe is really scary. And I'm sorry if I'm getting emotional, but
you're right.
The idea that this is politicized, I'm really not. I was very nervous to talk about this on the show because I thought it would become politicized, and it really shouldn't be. On both sides, it should be called out.
Right.
And just because I don't technically have Jewish family that are blood related to me, it doesn't mean I don't take this as seriously, and it is very dangerous. Very dangerous. And I think we all collectively as Americans on both sides, and what Ilhan Omar is saying is very scary to me, and it's very scary to a lot of people, and I don't think you have to be Jewish to recognize
You don't.
that.
And I just hope
Jewish.
instead of a resolution
Levy,
just from the Democrats, I'm tired of the selective outrage, and I hope that we have a joint resolution.
So yeah, that was pretty dumb. But again, with Meghan McCain, I mean, do you expect anything more from her? I mean, that's basically all she is there on The View for at this point, is just to make outrageous claims, be overdramatic about things in politics, and just get clowned by the other host. I mean, mainly it's just her being clowned. Like, every time I see anything about Meghan McCain, it's about her either making some overdramatic or outrageous statement that isn't factually true or is completely overblown or is some kind of straw man argument, or I'll just see a video of her getting trashed by Joy Behar. So all she's there is for basically people to laugh at and for people to look at and be like, are you serious with what you're being outraged about, or with what you're straw manning somebody with this argument about Venezuela? Like, she is just, God, she's awful, but she's entertaining at the same time because she's actually that awful. It's like The View hired a car accident to be a host on the show. But you know my opinion on the Ilhan Omar thing from what I had said before I even played the clip. I went on and on about it because, like I said, it genuinely annoys me, and I can't stand this faux outrage from everybody. Meghan McCain was the queen of faux outrage in that clip. I can't imagine that she's actually that scared of Ilhan Omar's comments. If you relook at Ilhan Omar's comments and think that should be scaring a grown woman to tears, somebody that supported Republicans especially, to tears, that's just fucking outrageous. There's no other way around it. There's really no other way around it. It's outrageous that Meghan McCain could go out there and say, you know what, Ilhan Omar's comments are so scary that I'm like so broken down in fear of what these comments mean and what these comments could spur on from other people. And I have people that are basically family to me that are Jewish. I mean, Joe Lieberman's a bad person, so that's not the best person to use as an example. But all right, so she said Joe Lieberman, and okay, fine, you do care about Joe Lieberman even though he's a bad guy. There are plenty of better Jewish people you could have picked than that to say if you're trying to say, you know what, I really care about somebody. I mean, Joe Lieberman, it's like, God, how could anybody care about Joe Lieberman? But nonetheless, she goes in this thing, and it almost reminds me if somebody had to do a book report on a serious topic and they procrastinated the entire time that they were supposed to be doing the project, and they shoved it off to the last minute, and then finally they had to just present it, and it was on some harsh topic, and they decided, you know what, I'm going to try and just go for like the few main facts that are very sad about this. I'm going to just try and faux outrage my way through this entire thing and just bullshit my 10-minute presentation. That's the way Meghan McCain seemed right there. The reason why Meghan McCain is doing that, though, one of two different reasons, but the reason that she's doing that is different from why somebody doing their book report would be doing it, but it's still the same concept. It's her bullshitting a faux outrage to get people on her side and get people to agree with her that, you know what, Ilhan Omar's comments are scary. They're scaring people into tears. It plays. Ilhan Omar's comments are part of a larger wave of anti-Semitism that's across the globe right now, that's growing in popularity. And just, come on. Like, yes, is anti-Semitism on the rise? Yes. Is that due to more of right-wing ideas, or is that due to left-wing ideas? I guarantee it's not due to the left-wing ideas. It's just true. So Donald Trump, when he was coming to prominence, directly correlated with the rise in right-wing hate groups. So is Donald Trump more of somebody that riles up anti-Semitism, or is Ilhan Omar? And like I said, Ilhan Omar said nothing wrong. She really said nothing wrong. She said something that was a sensitive area that basically the establishment has set this trap for a very long time to snag you if you're criticizing Israel. They just, Representative Juan Vargas basically said that in a tweet when he was condemning Ilhan Omar, basically said, yeah, any criticism of Israel, unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. And I added the completely onto the second one, but he said it was unacceptable in his tweet. And it's just so frustrating. It's just so frustrating, and it makes your blood boil because you know that she didn't say anything wrong, but people are continuously framing it as if she said something that was disgustingly anti-Semitic. And they frame it that way, and they frame it that way, and they frame it that way. And sadly, most of the people that are framing it that way are either prominent figures in the Republican Party, prominent figures in the establishment of the Democratic Party, or prominent figures in the media. Luckily, there have been enough prominent figures on the actual left to combat those figures. And to combat them enough where now this resolution that's going to be passing in the House today is not directly correlated to Ilhan Omar, even though obviously we know what spurred on this entire resolution happening in the first place. It was this whole Ilhan Omar controversy, maybe a tad bit of the Steve King thing, but I mean, look at how much easier the Steve King thing passed over just because he's a Republican, and then everybody just forgets about it. And Steve King that news cycle went very quickly for the Steve King thing. That lasted a couple of days compared to the Ilhan Omar controversy. I did my first video for the channel a few weeks ago on Ilhan Omar when this first broke, the first day that it happened. So the fact that it's been going on for this long and we're still going to resolutions about it, the fact that the resolution's happening now, you know that it's because of the Ilhan Omar thing far more than it is the Steve King thing. Even though the Steve King thing was 1,000 times, if not 1,000,000 times more egregious than the Ilhan Omar thing, because honestly, the Ilhan Omar thing wasn't egregious at all. And I feel like I have to reiterate that over and over and over again, but it needs to be reiterated because she didn't say anything wrong. She told the truth, she pointed out a fact, she spoke truth to power, and power didn't like that. So power tried to smear her and make her look like she's this anti-Semitic person. And let's not be fooled either that her identity in all of this isn't a huge part of why they were able to try and, or why they went after it so virulently. Because that was, I almost like had a stroke there. I could not pronounce that, but that's why they went after it so hard. Because they basically saw a Muslim woman criticizing Israel, and they're like, you know what, if this is ever, first off, that is the most that somebody's criticized AIPAC as far back as I can remember in terms of a politician doing that. So when you have a politician doing that, and it just so happens to be one of the first Muslim women in Congress, that already people on the more conservative side of things already view with distrust solely because of her identity. And not all conservatives by any means, but certainly certain people that are conservatives definitely view her with distrust. Just look at that poster of her that's in the state capitol building down in, I think that's West Virginia. So that it made her the perfect target for them to play this trap out on, where she calls out something legitimate because she's brave and she wants to do the right thing, and she wants to fight for the right things and bring the wrong things out to the light. And the establishment, for not only the Republican Party, but some in the media and some in the establishment of the Democratic Party, saw this as the perfect time to be able to use that smear, because they thought, who else would be easier to use a smear on than Ilhan Omar, one of the first Muslim women in Congress, where they feel like a lot of Americans probably already don't trust her as much as they would somebody that's not a Muslim woman in Congress, or just not a Muslim in Congress at all. So don't be fooled and think, oh, this is just them being super protective of AIPAC and Israel, and they would call anybody anti-Semitic for this. They would, but the fact that it gained even more momentum because of her identity, and that's a sad reality of the situation, because they wouldn't have been all over. I just can't say it exactly, because they wouldn't have been all over it the way that they have been about just smearing her and saying she needs to be off of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Congress, and it just made her an easier target for them to try and go after in this smear, just because of preconceptions that certain people in this country have about Muslim Americans and Muslims in general. So it made her even more of a target when she spoke up, but that makes her, I'm sure she realized that before she even did it, and it makes her even more brave and more bold for standing up and speaking out against this, even though people were definitely going to come out and smear her. And not just some random person coming out and smearing her. Powerful people were going to come out and smear her. People that she works in Congress with, people that are in the leadership of Congress. The stupid fucking president of the United States, Donald Trump. I mean, people were going to come out and smear her for this and be hypocrites on the Republican side of things and just slam her all day, even though they supported people like Steve King. So that is the situation. And like I said, I want to bring attention to this one last time because it hasn't gotten enough attention. There are plenty of states. I think there's 25 states in the United States right now that have laws being anti-BDS. So you can't get a government contract or work for this government organization unless you sign this contract that basically says that you won't be anti-Israel. And that is a clear violation of the First Amendment. That's a violation of free speech. A legitimate crackdown on free speech, by the way. Not just some faux college campus crackdown on free speech that the dark web always talks about, or that Ben Shapiro always talks about. So, yeah, there are legitimate problems with how pro-Israel the institutions of the United States are, and they have to be addressed. They have to be brought to light, and they have to be talked about in a manner that's civil and nuanced and logical, rather than just smearing somebody anytime that they come out with criticism of it. But at the same time, you see how much corruption there is in the system, because when somebody does come out and try to talk about what the reality is of the situation, all that ends up happening is they get smeared by a bunch of people in power. And luckily, there are enough progressives and enough reasonable people out here to stand up and fight for her and kick back at these establishment figures and these Republican hypocrites that are calling Ilhan Omar out and calling for her to be removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee and calling for her to step down. So, congrats to everybody that did fight for Ilhan, for anybody that made their voice heard for Ilhan. You made a difference, and we got to continue to keep making our voices heard and making a difference, because the Democratic Party listens, but you have to really rattle the establishment cage for the Democratic Party to ever get them to actually listen and to back off and to hear you out. And progressives need to keep doing that, because that's the only way that Nancy Pelosi is going to do anything that we need her to do in Congress leading up to 2020.